Next up is our fourth session of the day, which is maintaining continuity during and after an incident. Our speaker is Guy Beveridge, and Guy Beveridge is the Director of Business Development for Strategos International, the worldwide leader in safety and security solutions for businesses. As an expert in security management, crime, loss prevention, investigations, and crisis response, he has managed security projects, both national and international, for businesses that top the Fortune 500 list. Guy specializes in prediction, recognition, and evaluation of crime risk and consults with businesses, owners, managers, insurance carriers, and police worldwide, developing congruent plans to reduce crime risk through policy design and training. Guy worked on the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force immediately following the events of 9/11 to develop first responder response protocols and capabilities for terrorist attacks. He is an internationally known trainer, speaker, professional security consultant, and licensed master peace officer in Texas. Now, without further ado, Guy Beveridge.
Hey, thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Alertus, for hosting webinars like this. I think it's so vitally important to our nation and to our communities that we all serve. So I really appreciate that. And just for the general public out there, I really want to say, it's great to come on these webinars because we automatically have something in common. I really don't know what I'm going to say either. So let me get into this. We'll talk about business continuity, but I want to kind of back it up a little bit first and foremost and talk about how we prevent even having to use business continuity. Now, we know that preparation doesn't equal prevention. We can't prevent all attacks out there. If you look at the most highly protected man in the world, we could just loosely say it's the President of the United States. Even the Secret Service, who has the best training, the best capabilities, the best abilities, they still fail at the job sometimes. You just look at the Bush shoe incident in Iraq, or you look at Ronald Reagan and his detail and difficulties they had. Those are just some examples. But so preparation for these events doesn't equal prevention, but what it gives us is peace of mind to be able to perform properly in these type of incidences. So just going through what we talk about here at Strategos International and what I think is so vitally important, especially when you're talking about the Alertus system, is that success or failure in these crises is going to be up to the people on scene when it occurs. So there's two different types of responders out there. There are the professional first responders. Those are your police, law enforcement, sheriffs, deputies, state troopers. Those are the ones that are coming to your crisis when you pick up the phone and call 911. And as we know, national response times are typically about 10 minutes. And so if I had to wait in a crisis 10 minutes, that's not going to be successful for me. We can't just sit back and wait for law enforcement to arrive. The other type of responder out there, the one that I think I'm talking to today, is going to be a true first responder. Those are the people that are on scene when bang happens, when gunshots happen, when a crisis starts. Those people immediately have to get into action, and they are going to determine ultimate success or failure in this process. When you look at a history of active shooter response or active killer events, in the last 10 years alone, only about 9 or 10 of these incidences have been solved by on-duty law enforcement. So we want to make vitally sure that we have the proper training for all of our staff, all of the people that work for us, all of the CEOs, the C-suite. We make sure we back up. So before we ever get to business continuity plans, we have the right training, the right mindset in place for the people that we are protecting what we care about most. So just to give a little psychological response, everybody has a startle and fear response. I don't care if you're a Ninja, Special Forces, Delta, Ranger, operator. You still have a startle and fear response when a crisis happens. And it's only after that startle and fear response that's going to dictate how we respond. Now, an untrained response where your staff, your employees, your business is untrained, or they have minimal training, which was either maybe a fancy PowerPoint that was haphazardly thrown together and maybe haphazardly presented, and then also some fancy posters on the wall, which, let's face it, a lot of businesses out there operate just like this. That's an untrained response. And the reason we say that is because if your training, the training that you have, did not impact the sympathetic nervous system of your employees, then they're going to still default to their startle and fear response, which is fight, flight, or freeze. And then if you back that up even more, if they don't have a capability or ability to fight, and they don't have a capability or ability to flight, then freeze is all they're going to be left with. And that's usually where people devolve to. So in an untrained response, normalcy bias will set in pretty quickly. This is, I can't believe this is even happening. This is, that can't be gunshots out in the hallway. That's definitely just firecrackers, fireworks. And we hear this time and time again in witness statements from all these types of events all over the nation. Then that'll lead you to disbelief. I can't believe, again, this is happening. And then denial will set in for everybody. I don't know what I can do and where I can go. Panic ensues very shortly after that. If you wanted to look at Colonel Jeff Cooper's color code of stress and fear response on the body, you would be quickly at condition gray or condition black right around this point. And then ultimately, that's going to lead us to helplessness. And that's unfortunately where a lot of employees will land. That's unfortunately where a lot of businesses, this is all they've done for their people, is allow them to lead to helplessness. And what they've done essentially is just use hope as a strategy. And I think we all know in this day and age, hope is not a strategy for any type of crisis. When we have a trained response, we have people that have qualified training that have come out to our organization and taken a measurement of our risk and then train us and develop policies for us. And ultimately what it looks like for us is we can accept a crisis is happening, then we can be very aware and be very proactive. And that's, we need to talk about situational awareness right here. The problem we have nowadays as a society is we are more connected to everybody in the world than we ever have been at any point in our evolution. However, we are less connected from each other, because by and large, we will stay in our cell phone, our head will be down, we don't want to engage with people, we don't look people in the eye, and we don't pay attention when we are out in public spaces. If you want to use the El Paso Walmart as an example, this clown, this coward got out of a car with hearing protection on, a firearm in his hand, and walked across a parking lot into a door and then started shooting. There's no way that shouldn't have been interrupted at some point during that. Because and the reason why is we don't have good situational awareness. If you want to improve situational awareness, I mean, there's a ton of courses out there. I'll just tell you the easiest way to do it. When you step into a public place, take a deep breath and stop, look, and listen. What you're doing at that point is establishing a baseline. Whatever space you're in, let's say Walmart, you pull out of the way of the main doors when you come in, take a deep breath, oxygen is free, take it all in, and then stop, look, and listen. Now you're establishing the baseline of the sights and sounds that are in this place. As soon as that baseline is interrupted, you can get into action and stop delaying. So not to go into a course on situational awareness, it's just a little tidbit. From this, in a trained response, we'll have recall. What can we do, and what do we have ability-wise, and what do we have capability-wise? And then we'll have an urgent response to the activity, to those clowns and those killers coming in. And then ultimately, that leads us to a commitment to action, to actually doing something. And this is where I say success or failure in these processes will be determined by the true first responder, those on scene when the activity takes place. So the realities of it is everybody's responsibility to prepare for this. So you look at business continuity planning, that's fantastic. A business should definitely have that, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. But it is everyone's responsibility in organization. It's not just a law enforcement problem. It's not just your security personnel. Those are people that are part of a plan. They're not your only plan. It's also responsibility of the organization that they have good leadership in these plans, and they do develop plans, policies, and procedures. They have qualified training for their plans, policies, and procedures, and everything they do will be insurable, of course. And then it is also an individual preparation where the individual maintains situational awareness. The individual is free in your organization to see something, say something, do something. And a lot of businesses that I consult with, what I have them understand is if there is a doubt, then there is no doubt. get into action. And if we have to figure it out later, if we delayed somebody or locked the door when we shouldn't have, that's fine. At least we didn't allow the killer into our workplace. So an organizational response is always combined with law enforcement and security response. First and foremost, we have education. We educate everybody that is a member of the plan or is affected by the plan. We train people to the affected level that they are within their plan. Then we have preparation and coordination, and that's our planning in advance. And then lastly, implementation. And you'll see at the end of this, this is all cyclical. It is all repeated. We continue to take measurements, we continue to test it, and we continue to make sure these plans are still good, because the techniques and the tactics of the enemy are ever evolving. And so we must evolve also to stay ahead of them. I'm not going to go into a long presentation on the OODA loop, but you always want to be ahead in the OODA loop of your enemy. That's why this is cyclical. So we recommend a 3-out approach when you're using the Alertus system. What do we do after the beacons go off? After we get a notification, what do we do? Well, we simply put in the 3-out approach, and this is a non-linear model. Most of the models out there, run, hide, fight, avoid, deny, defend, they tend to be a linear model. The problem with run, hide, fight immediately is that when I tell you to run, you need more input. You need to know what direction. When it's tested over and over again, the run, hide, fight model in facilities, workplaces, schools, churches, we have active shoot off rounds. Over 50% of the time, people run right towards the gunman because it's such an echo chamber. We use the 3-out model. It's a nonlinear, and so it doesn't matter. It only matters where you are in relationship to the actor or the perceived threat, and then you choose your individual out model. You either lock out, get out, or take out. It's your model for where you are in relationship to that actor. So as we get into business continuity planning, I'm just going to put all this up here right here, and we'll talk through it so everybody can see it. When law enforcement arrives, that's going to be a very, very chaotic scene. When law enforcement is dispatched to these type of events, law enforcement typically gets very limited information from 911 callers. A lot of times the 911 caller is so overwhelmed and distraught, and they're in their fight, flight, or freeze mode that they're starting to freeze up, or they're getting into condition gray, that they can't even get their address out for their location. So we recommend always that, we reinforce address. We have address in different places so we can get that brain back on the track. So once you can give your address out, then you can start also giving us more information. Also, it's important to know that ever since Columbine and then past Columbine, Virginia Tech, law enforcement has changed their response model. In the old days, you saw in Columbine, those clowns, those killers, those cowards, they had over 40 minutes, 45 minutes to kill as many kids as they wanted to. There's reports that they got so tired of shooting people, they started stabbing people to see what that was like. And that's because law enforcement waited and paused and waited for SWAT teams to arrive. And we don't do that anymore. When we have a response like this, we are dispatched to it. We have solo officer response capabilities. The first officer on the scene will attempt to make entry and go to close with the enemy and change that dude's channel, shut that person down and make them stop doing what they started doing. You also have to understand that it's going to be a coordinated effort from all around the area. So every law enforcement agency that has that frequency for that dispatch will be coming to that location. So if you're expecting to see your local police arrive first, that may not happen. If a sheriff's deputy is closer, they may be the first one there. And it's so important for our employees to recognize the different uniforms that are out there in their location. To simply be looking for a dark blue or navy uniform and you don't see it, but you see a brown or tan uniform, you still want to recognize that as a good guy. So it may be a common disbelief out there that all law enforcement agencies don't train together. We don't all come together and say, hey, this is the way we're going to do this. Understand that an active killer event is a very fluid and flowing situation. So as we're trained in law enforcement, we're going to be responding the proper way, but it's important to know there's going to be a lot of information coming to us and a lot of chaos going on around us as well, that we're trying to manage all of that. So what we recommend, obviously, is remaining calm as possible and follow all directions. We don't put any items in our hands because we know killers use guns and guns go in hands and that's how they're fired. We raise hands and spread fingers as much as possible. We keep hands visible at all times. We avoid those quick or dodging or darting movements towards officers, such as grabbing them. We see this again time and time again where people run up and just start hugging because they're so glad someone has arrived to solve their problem for them. We avoid pointing, screaming, yelling. We don't stop to ask officers help or direction. When evacuated, we will be telling you which way to go and how to get out. And you'll probably be sent to a holding area until we identify everybody and make sure that everybody is legitimate. If you can call 911, that's not your first option. Your first option is to practice your lockout, your get out, or your takeout. And then after that, you can call 911. What we do recommend is that not everybody in your organization start calling 911. Typically in a city or a municipality dispatch center, you have maybe 2 dispatchers on at a time. You can see how quickly that would be overwhelming for those dispatchers to field all those 911 calls if everybody in your organization started calling 911. So if you have information such as the location of the shooter, the number of shooters, a physical description, the type of weapons, firearms, or the number of potential victims, those are good things to relay to 911. But outside of that, let's make sure that we're not just overwhelming the dispatchers, so we can get people there quick, fast, and in a hurry. So in saying all this, it's very important that we have a business continuity plan for our organization. So when crisis hits, we understand what we're going to do. What we're trying to do is take people's brain somewhere so the body can follow or the body can perform. And what do I mean by that? This is the training that allows you to put something in your brain to believe it so you don't deny it when it starts happening. So we don't immediately, in our lazy brains, our brains are lazy. Now our brain, when it wakes up during the day, all it wants to do is conserve calories. So that's where you get the idea that that's fireworks in the hallway, because the brain understands that. The brain doesn't logically go to that's gunshots in the hallway. So we need to train that lazy brain to understand that is gunshots in the hallway. And one of the ways we do this is through business continuity planning. So for pre-incident planning, we have to have a risk assessment, and a risk assessment will help us, number one, define what a crisis is. So a crisis for business continuity planning purposes, a lot of businesses try to say, well, if a worker falls over and has a cardiac emergency or some sort of first aid emergency in our facility, that's a crisis. Well, it's a crisis, yes, for that individual, but it is not a crisis as far as your business is concerned necessarily. A risk assessment will help you define what your crisis is. So we do a really good risk assessment. A lot of that you probably want to hire an outside source to do because that is a disinterested third party. They're taking an accurate measurement, and you're going to fall under their insurance when they come out and give you the risk assessment report. This works towards prevention. We have a physical protecting all of our stuff that's inside, the physical, tangible stuff, to include the people. We work on that prevention side, and also the logical or the technology side. We work on preventing access to that or destruction of that. If we're a business that is a type of supply and a supply chain, like a warehouse, we have vendor management. If we have vendors on site or if we have vendors coming to us, how are we going to communicate to them? And then we also have inventory that we have to try to salvage as much as possible or protect for. In the business continuity plan creation, you want to address things like emergency response, disaster recovery, business recovery, and crisis management. This is all pre-incident planning. This is where you start planning, you start talking about this, and then you write it down. Subjective plans are not going to stand the test. Objective plans that are written and they're insurable by your insurance company will stand the test, and they're more easily defendable in court. When the incident occurs, we want to, number one, have a plan for evacuation and addressing the life safety issues for all of our employees. We have an incident and crisis management team that gets involved. And in the business continuity management, we talk about recovery. Are we going to be able to relocate? In this relocation and processing, you would have already identified this in the pre-incident planning. How are we going to recover? Is there a business located adjacent to us or near enough to us that we could potentially relocate to, so we can start up operations again as soon as possible? We have processing where we reprioritize our needs for our business and our employees, and then how do we continue to serve our product or our customer? We also have a technology recovery. Does this come out of the cloud? How do we recover our data, and how do we process our recovery? Post-incident, this all goes into our planning as well. And we look at Repair and restoration, how long are we going to be out of our facility? Now understand this, if it is a crime scene, you may be out of that facility for a long time. It may be protracted out to a month or longer, and there may be things that are seized from your business that are part of the crime. So we have to have a plan for that. How do we get back up and running? How are we going to process claims for our business? We have to have ideas for that. They also go into our pre-incident planning. We increase our production levels. How do we get back in business and get back up and running? And then we look at lessons learned. And this is where you can see it's all cyclical. We always analyze a crisis. We always get a team together or a working group to analyze our crisis and figure out how we can get better, where our opportunities for improvement are. And again, the best thing you can do is in your pre-incident planning that you try to address what crisis is and then how we're going to mitigate that crisis. And a lot of that comes in with good plans, policies, and procedures and training, of course. So we also want to ensure the purpose we have when we have a mission statement or a vision statement. Our ultimate plan is to resume business functions to a normal state as soon as possible. Now understand this, you may also have a problem with your employees wanting to return back to work. So in your post or your pre-incident planning, you may have numbers on hand for counselors to come into your organization and figure out how we can massage this, how we can help these employees come back into our organization. So what are the benefits of this? Well, we do have a moral responsibility to protect employees. When you have a business, you run a business, you have a moral obligation to your employees that when you show up here, I'm going to protect you. I am going to keep you safe as much as possible. This is why we have organizations like OSHA that come in and tell us, you have to have safety glasses on here. When you do this activity, you have to have fall protection. There is not yet an OSHA regulation other than the general duty clause that tells you you have to have emergency planning for active shooter. But I will just tell you, OSHA is paying attention, and it is likely to come down, I would guess probably within the next 3 to 5 years, that will be a specific OSHA guideline that you have to have good quality qualified plans, policies, and procedures and training for your active shooter programs at your business. So we also have you have to involve the community. What would you expect from the community? What can you expect from the community? What resources do you have out there? And what would be your environmental impact if something were to go wrong at your facility? Let's say you're a grocery distribution center and you happen to have a couple thousand pounds of anhydrous ammonia on hand. What would be the impact if that were to be released into the environment? So you're going to have an environmental responsibility as well. So in this, we also understand that we're facilitating compliance with all our regulatory requirements, and it will fall under the OSHA general duty clause that you have a duty to protect your workers from reasonably known causes of harm, and that would be an active shooter. So why do we, continuing in this, why do we even have it? We have to look at, let me go back to that last slide real quick. It enhances our ability to reduce disruptions to our service and delivery. This is why we have a plan. It reduces financial losses. You're in business because you want to make money. So we reduce our financial losses. We reduce regulatory fines by having good plans, policies, and procedures. We reduce a loss of market share by having these good plans in place, and we've trained our employees. And we reduce a loss of damages to equipment or materials or our product by having these plans in place. So when we talk about, I'm just going to put all these up here right here. When we talk about our emergency response procedures, we first address the life, health, and safety of all of our employees. We protect what matters most, and that is our employees. Then we work on a damage assessment and how do we report this event. Let's say we have multiple locations or we're a global manufacturer. How do we communicate to all of our other partners or all of our other sites that we've had a crisis, our operations are going to be down for a little bit of time, and what can the other operations take on or what can the other operations do? At what point do we declare a disaster, and how do we communicate that as well? Also, we have to understand in the planning and the development of this, how are we going to notify people? Who are we going to notify and what modality are we going to use to notify them? This is great for the Alertus system because that gives us an immediate notification of a crisis or an emergency that is going on, and we can communicate to people that way. But we also want to have that defined. Who are we going to communicate and how are we going to communicate to them? We define the role of the crisis management executive, and then we have an executive succession planning. Let's say one of your executives at the upper level in the C-suite is taken out. Who is stepping into that role, or who is managing that role if that person has expired in some way? We also address things like facility accessibility, who can go in and who can't. When will it be determined who can go in? Who determines that? Will it be the fire marshal? Will it be the local law enforcement? Will it be a structural engineer from the city? We have to know that so we know when we can go in and start assessing the damage that we have in our crisis. And then how are we going to recover our critical assets? We also want to have a plan in here for how are we going to clean up a crime scene. That's a very specialized line of work, and you want to, in your pre-planning, communicate to the team, here's who we're going to call, here's primary, here's secondary, here's tertiary, to get this cleaned up so we can get everybody back to work. And then also, how are we going to communicate to those employees at home that may be off, or if we have shift workers, how are we going to communicate to, please don't come in or come to this site right now, more information will follow. We also want to make sure that this is all in place and tested prior to ever needing it. The first time we ever need this, or the first time we ever use this, should not be in a crisis. Very much so, the first time law enforcement ever comes to your facility is not during a time of crisis. Invite them, have them come over to your facility, have them walk through your facility so they can see the different layouts of the facility, and they can start formulating a plan on how they would respond. We also, in our pre-planning, we look at how are we going to, do we have alternative sites, locations? Can they support our business operations? Can they support us for a limited amount of time? Do they have the space to support us? And how soon can we occupy that space? Do they have the right utilities and the right connection? We look at logistics and our supplies. How do we continue to acquire our product? How do we continue to transport it? How do we involve our personnel in that? How do we get our remote workforce involved when we have people that are outside of our workforce that are not willing or ready to come back to work yet? How do we get a remote or a temporary workforce in there to continue our business operations? And do we have emergency funds or access to emergency fund accounts that we can start paying for the resources we need to get back into business? Obviously, everything falls under documentation. I can't beat that to death enough. We want to have good plans, policies, and procedures in place that are trained to by qualified quality personnel. We have activity and status reports in there, checklists, and this all tells us ahead of time, hey, these are the steps I need to take to get back into business. So these should be established in the pre-planning. How am I going to get back into business? How am I going to serve my workforce? How am I going to serve their psychological needs and their physical needs while we're recovering from this crisis? In resumption, we will look at contracts for emergency vendor services and risk avoidance and mitigation planning. How do we continue to make sure that we're doing well at this? We also have an emergency business recovery procedures that are in place. And again, all of this will be documented, and you can have it in a couple of different places. Each organization or each facility or each building will have a hard copy and a binder that is constantly reviewed and checked and managed. And you can also have it in a cloud-based service. So if you have to evacuate immediately, you'll still have all access to all the information for all your employees and your plans, policies, and procedures that you can start working on. So I'm just going to kind of get through this to make sure we honor everybody's time. Everything in here in the implementation phase, it includes training, testing, recovery, and audit. We always go back in a cycle and try to measure everything to make sure it is still a viable product. In training, by doing training, we increase the organization's awareness of the business continuity plan. We train them to the affected level that they are in the plan. Then that goes for every level of the organization. Executive teams may be trained differently. The operational teams trained a little bit differently. Again, it's all training to their affected level within the plan. In the testing phase, we confirm that the plan meets our emergency recovery objectives. We measure the accuracy of the plans because, like I said, the techniques and tactics of the enemy and what we're facing, the crisis we may be facing, may change from time to time. So we have to update our plans for that. And then we also allow our senior leaders and management to evaluate personnel readiness for a crisis event. I'll just put all this up here again. So for testing our plans, a test just to give you an overview of this. We want to have objectives right out of the gate. What do we hope to achieve out of this? What are the details of the test? When is it going to be scheduled? And then we always have a post-test review. How did it go? What was the response? What are our learning points from this, and how can we get better? Some of the test types we can do, it's just a checklist. Let's walk through this. Structured walkthrough, simulation, parallel testing, and identifying existing deficiencies. How are we going to get back online? Our primary facility must be stabilized and secured. Prior to getting back online, we have a procurement. How are we going to get everything back that we need? Do we need to buy more supplies? Do we need to hire more people? How do we report that up? And then we have a relocation back to the primary site. How do we restore order and prioritization? And how do we end the disaster? How do we declare the end of the disaster to our employees? Real quick, just getting into this, how do we have post-recovery reporting? We want to go back in and look at, did we have any gaps in this? We write down and go over lessons learned, and then we review how our performance was. Then we train, we retrain if we need to, we adjust our plans if we need to, we do retraining to the adjusted plans, and then we redistribute the plan and communicate the plan to all stakeholders. So there you can kind of see it in the cycle: prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. And your business continuity planning and your preparation for this is always a cycle. It is always going on. Whether there's a crisis actually happening or not, this should be a cycle that continues. We continue to go over and over our plan to make sure we are all trained to the affected level and we have great response and great performance when a crisis happens. So I'll open it up to questions, and I'll put my information up there if anybody wants to reach out to me for further training opportunities, risk assessments, or anything I can help you with. And again, I do want to thank Jessica and Alertus for putting these webinars together. I think they're so vital to what we do every day.
All right, thanks, Guy. I know you were trying to push through there, and we appreciate a lot of informative information. And we'll go ahead and get to our first question. So, in the event of an evacuation for our building, we notify employees to evacuate a safe distance from the affected building. For liability reasons, we recommend at least 50 feet. Would you consider this to be a best practice?
Well, you know, typically in these crisis situations, 50 feet may not be enough, because 50 feet for any particular building may just be you're in the parking lot, and we have to think about, where are our first responders coming to? Well, they're coming to our parking lot. We don't want to use fire evacuation points necessarily as our crisis response, where we're going to go to evacuate, because that's mainly for a fire. That gets us far enough away from the fire situation. When we're talking about active threat, active killer events, we want to be as far away as possible and get to a safe enough place as possible. So I recommend to businesses, when I come out and do risk assessments, that they partner with all the organizations or units or businesses that are in their local area to let them know, hey, in a crisis, would you mind if our employees ran this way? And we can't just say, you know, if you're on this side of the building, this is the direction you're going, because that won't hold true in a crisis. You're going to have to go out the door or get out of the facility the best way you can. And you may not be on that same side of the building, or the actor may be on that side where you think you're going to exit. So when I say it's a free flowing, it's a fluid situation. We just have to be prepared to get out and get as far away as possible.
Okay, perfect. Next question here. How often do you suggest we practice, test, and train our employees?
You know, anytime we have a change to the plan or an update to the plan, then we definitely need to train people to that affected level. Sometimes if it's just a minor change, we can put out a memo and make sure that all the team leaders go and visit with everybody on their team to say, hey, did you get this memo? Here's what the intent was behind it. Here's the goals and objectives about this memo. But if it's something more drastic about, we're adding doors or we're adding capabilities to our plan, like an Alertus system, different beacons, different notifications, different marquees, and we want to make sure everybody that is affected by that is trained to their affected level. So it'll be very different, but we want to definitely revisit our plan at least once a quarter to make sure that it's still a viable plan and a workable plan.
Okay, awesome. We do have about 5 more minutes for the question section, and we haven't had any more questions come in. So if anyone else has any more questions for Guy, I would submit them now. And while we're waiting for that, if anyone has any extra questions, Guy, if you have anything else you want to discuss, I don't know if you felt like a little bit rushed or whatever. If you wanted to add a couple more things that you think are important, go for it. I don't see any more questions coming in at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to kind of revisit that 3-out model and just talk a little bit more about that. When we look at run, hide, fight, and avoid, deny, defend, and I talked earlier that these are typically linear models where you do one, then do the next, and then do the next, and hope that works for you. And as I said earlier, hope is not really a strategy. Even when we have training out there for our employees that is a hands-on type training, it's usually never enough to really impact that sympathetic nervous system. What we really have to do in these training events, and what we do at Strategos, is we come out to your organization, we do a blended learning style where we sit down and we do a little bit of PowerPoint, but half of the presentation is out on your floor, out in your workspaces. We're putting a little bit of stress, a little bit of duress under people, and we're showing them how to lock, layer, and reinforce doors. And what we're trying to get through to people is you are preventing access. We know in these events, we see it historically time and time again, that these clowns, these killers, what they're trying to do is kill as many people as possible. That is typically their goal. And when they don't have access to people, whether it's visual or physical access, then we're lowering that kill rate, and we're actually accelerating that timeline for law enforcement to get there to close with this individual and change their channel. So we're teaching your employees to lock, layer, and reinforce where they are in a lockout situation. And when we talk about the 3-out model, it's very important to understand in a large space. Let's say if you have a cafeteria at your business, in a large space like that, depending on where you are when that event takes place, you may have a different out model than somebody who's right at the front door where the person's coming in. Your out model might be a get out, where their out model immediately might be a takeout. So that's why it's a non-linear approach, where everybody in the same space doesn't have to do the same thing. You pick your out based on where you are in relationship to the threat or the indirect threat. And that's so vital for employees to understand. When we talk about run, hide, fight, that this linear thought process, people usually freeze up because it doesn't work right away for them. And we have to put a little bit of stress and duress on people and get them actually locking and layering, reinforcing doors, and getting out to impact that sympathetic nervous system, to reprogram their brain, take the brain somewhere so the body can perform when it's called upon. And that's why I find that so vitally important in these workplace violence trainings.
Wow, that was really, really informative, Guy. We appreciate you coming on today. I'm going to pass it over to Jessica, and she can intro our last speaker.